The crisp winter air bites at Sophie Miller's exposed skin as she sits alone on the steps of an empty wedding venue. A beautiful, elegant structure once filled with joy, the grand hall now stands desolate, quiet, and abandoned, its decorations still in place, yet eerily lifeless. Sophie, dressed in an exquisite white wedding gown, is a stark contrast to the stillness around her. Her head is bowed, her hands covering her face, and soft, sorrowful sobs escape her lips. The once joyful occasion has been shattered, and what was meant to be the happiest day of her life is now the most painful. Sophie's eyes are red, swollen from hours of crying. The weight of the situation presses down on her chest, each breath a reminder of how fragile her world has become. The snow falls softly around her, blanketing the ground in a thick layer of white. It should have been a moment of celebration, of joy, but instead, it feels like a cruel metaphor for her life now. Cold, isolated, and empty. The dreams she once had seemed to have melted away, like the snowflakes that settled gently on her wedding gown, dissolving into nothingness. She pulls her knees to her chest, trying to find comfort in the only thing she has left, the small weathered notebook resting in her lap. The notebook is filled with names she and Max, her fiancé, had once discussed with such excitement and love. Names they had imagined for their child, names they thought they would choose together. Sophie traces her finger over the pages, some names crossed out, others circled with little notes beside them. Dreams of a future she thought was certain, a future that now feels like a distant, unreal fantasy. Max had been her world. He had been the man she was supposed to marry, the father of her child. But now, all of that is gone. The text Max had sent her earlier that morning, the words, "I can't do this, I'm sorry," echo in her mind like a nightmare she can't escape. The simple, devastating 7 words had destroyed everything. Sophie had been left alone, not just without a partner, but without the life she had envisioned. The man she thought would stand beside her forever had turned his back on her. And now she is left with only the baby growing inside her, the only reminder of the future she thought she would have. Her fingers tremble as she holds the notebook, the reality of her situation threatening to swallow her whole. How could he leave her like this? How could he abandon her when she needed him the most? And the baby? What will happen to the life she's carrying inside her when she doesn't even know how to take care of herself anymore? Sophie's mind races with doubt, with questions that have no answers. She feels utterly alone, abandoned by the man she loved, by her family, and by the future she had hoped for. The dreams she had once held so tightly are now slipping through her fingers like sand. The cold air bites at her skin, but it doesn't compare to the coldness she feels deep inside her heart. She is surrounded by the remnants of a dream that has turned to dust. The snow continues to fall, covering everything in a blanket of white, but Sophie feels like she is invisible, hidden under the weight of her grief. She has no one to turn to, no one to share her pain with. The silence around her is deafening, as if the world has turned its back on her as well. She whispers to herself, "Nobody wants my baby." The words are like a dagger to her heart, sharp and unforgiving. In the stillness of the snow-covered landscape, Sophie's tears continue to fall. She wonders if this is the life she's been destined for, one of heartbreak and abandonment. How could she raise her child alone? How could she give her baby the love and life it deserves when she can barely find the strength to get through each day herself? The questions swirl in her mind, drowning out everything else, until she feels like she can't breathe. Her chest tightens with the weight of it all, and for a moment, she wonders if she can go on. The minutes stretch into hours as Sophie sits there, lost in her thoughts. The once beautiful wedding venue, the grand cathedral that was supposed to mark the beginning of her happily ever after, now seems like a cruel reminder of everything she has lost. She had imagined walking down the aisle with Max by her side, surrounded by friends and family, their future bright and full of promise. But now, all that is left are memories of a future that will never be. As the snow continues to fall, Sophie feels as though the world has gone on without her. She is trapped in this moment, unable to move forward. The weight of loneliness and despair is too much to bear. She thinks back to the days before everything fell apart, the days when she was full of excitement and hope, planning for the life she would build with Max. But now, all of those plans seem so distant, so far out of reach. Her hands tremble as she opens the notebook again, tracing her fingers over the baby names she had once hoped to choose with Max. The names now seem meaningless, symbols of a future that will never come to pass. She whispers them to herself, her voice barely audible above the sound of the falling snow, but they bring her no comfort. They are just names on a page, names that will never be spoken in the way she had imagined. Her heart aches as she clutches the notebook tightly to her chest, the tears falling faster now. It feels as though her entire world is falling apart, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. For the first time in her life, Sophie wonders if she will ever find happiness again. The quiet of the snow-covered wedding venue is only broken by the faint crunching of boots against the icy ground. Liam Turner, a 37-year-old entrepreneur and CEO of a leading tech company, had never imagined that today would take him to this remote location, let alone make him witness something that would stir his long-buried emotions. He had come to the venue with plans to meet potential investors for his business, but when he arrived, the place was strangely devoid of the joyful noise he had expected. Instead, he was greeted with a haunting silence, an air of abandonment that felt oddly familiar. Liam had built his empire from the ground up. A self-made millionaire, he was used to the fast pace of the corporate world. The board meetings, the constant deals, the endless pursuit of success. To the outside world, he was the epitome of achievement. He had everything: wealth, power, influence. But what he didn't have was peace. A part of him had died 2 years ago when his wife, Grace, had tragically passed away in a car accident. The pain of losing her had torn his world apart, and though he continued to work tirelessly, it was as though his heart had been locked away in a vault that he refused to open again. Since Grace's death, Liam had buried himself in work. He had avoided any emotional attachments, convincing himself that he didn't need anyone else. He had been surviving, not living. So, as he stepped through the grand entrance of the venue, with its sparkling chandeliers and elegant decor, his mind was still distant, focused on the tasks ahead. But something shifted when his eyes fell on her, Sophie Miller. There she was, sitting alone on the grand steps outside the church, her wedding gown soaked with snow, her face hidden in her hands. The world around her seemed to fade into the background, and all Liam could see was her posture slumped in sorrow, her stillness speaking volumes about the depth of her grief. It was a sight that tugged at his heart, though he couldn't understand why. The woman was a stranger, yet in that moment, she wasn't. Sophie's pain was unmistakable, the kind of pain Liam knew all too well. The grief of loss, the heavy weight of loneliness, and the feeling of being utterly abandoned by the person who was supposed to stand by you forever. He could feel the rawness of her emotion, and it brought him back to the nights when he had sat alone, drowning in his own sorrow. The last time he had felt such a deep ache was after Grace's passing, but this was different. He had never been able to shake the feeling that he was simply passing through life, but Sophie's vulnerability, her silent despair, made him wonder if he was being called to do something more than just exist. Liam paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. His instincts told him to keep walking, to mind his own business, and avoid becoming entangled in a stranger's pain. But something pulled at him, urging him to approach. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and began walking toward Sophie. His steps were slow but deliberate, the crunch of the snow underfoot adding to the quiet that enveloped them both. As he drew closer, he noticed the small details, the way her shoulders trembled with each sob, the slight shake in her hands as she clutched a notebook to her chest. It was a picture of heartache, and it stirred something within Liam that he hadn't felt in years. Compassion, empathy, a desire to offer comfort, though he had no idea how. When he reached her, Sophie didn't look up. Her head remained bowed, her tears continuing to fall in silence, as if the weight of her grief was too much for her to carry alone. Liam hesitated, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to offering emotional support, and he certainly wasn't the type to offer unsolicited comfort to someone he didn't know. But there was something in her sorrow that made him want to offer her a small moment of solace. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, his voice calm but soft, as if not wanting to disturb the fragile moment between them. He immediately regretted the question. It sounded too simple, too inadequate, but it was the only thing he could think of to break the silence. Sophie slowly lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of anger in her gaze, a reflection of the heartbreak she was enduring. But underneath the hurt, there was something else, a quiet, desperate plea for someone to see her, to not let her be invisible in her pain. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, trying to mask the vulnerability that was threatening to overwhelm her. Liam didn't respond to her words. Instead, he simply sat down beside her on the cold stone steps, making no attempt to push her to talk or explain herself. He didn't offer her empty words of encouragement or try to fix her. He just stayed with her, his presence steady and unwavering in the face of her sorrow. The minutes stretched into an uncomfortable silence, but it wasn't a silence of judgment. It wasn't one of awkwardness. It was a quiet, shared understanding of pain, of being alone in a world that often feels too big and too cold. Sophie didn't feel the need to speak, and Liam didn't feel the need to rush her. They just sat there together, two strangers connected by their shared loneliness, the snow falling softly around them. Eventually, Liam broke the silence, his voice low and understanding. "I don't know what you're going through," he said, his words carefully chosen, "but I do know loneliness. And you don't have to be alone right now." His simple words hit Sophie like a wave of relief, as if in that moment, someone finally understood what it felt like to be utterly lost. She looked at him again, her gaze softer this time, not filled with anger, but with something more fragile, a flicker of hope that perhaps this stranger didn't see her as broken or undeserving. He simply saw her, and in that moment, that was enough. Sophie didn't know why Liam was here or why he had chosen to sit beside her. She didn't know what he expected from her or if he had any hidden agenda. But for the first time that day, she felt like she wasn't completely alone in her grief. And for now, that was enough. She didn't have to explain herself. She didn't have to put on a brave face. Liam was here, and that small act of kindness made all the difference. As the snow continued to fall, Sophie allowed herself to breathe a little easier. She didn't have to figure everything out right now. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. The days following their quiet encounter were nothing like Sophie had imagined. She had expected to retreat further into herself, to continue living in the suffocating grip of grief and loss. But with Liam's presence, things began to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. He didn't push her, didn't try to force her to talk about her pain. But instead, he simply showed up. And that, in itself, was more than Sophie had ever expected from a stranger. Each morning, Sophie woke up in a room she didn't recognize, Liam's guest room in his spacious home, a place that felt like a sanctuary compared to the loneliness she had been experiencing. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt safe or cared for. Her mind often wandered back to the image of Max, the man who had promised her forever, and then left her stranded in a world that felt cold and uninviting. The sting of his betrayal was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been before. With Liam's steady presence, Sophie started to feel a sense of hope, even though it was small and fragile. Liam didn't fill her silence with advice or meaningless words. Instead, he listened when she needed to talk, and he sat quietly when she needed space. He accompanied her to her doctor's appointments, making sure she wasn't alone during a time when everything felt uncertain. Sophie couldn't remember the last time someone had taken the time to care for her, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. Liam's presence was like a quiet balm to the wounds that Max had left behind. One afternoon, Liam suggested they go out for a walk. The weather had cleared, and the sun, though weak, shone through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the freshly fallen snow. Sophie hesitated at first, not sure if she could handle being outside, but Liam's gentle encouragement made her agree. They walked together through the snow-covered park, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound in the stillness around them. Liam didn't ask her about the baby or her past with Max. Instead, they talked about anything and everything. How Sophie had once dreamed of becoming a photographer, the books she loved to read, the places she hoped to visit someday. For the first time in weeks, Sophie felt like herself again. She wasn't just a pregnant woman abandoned by her fiancé. She was Sophie, a woman with dreams and hopes beyond her current circumstances. The walk didn't last long, but it was enough to shift something inside her. Liam's ability to offer comfort without expectations, to simply be there without pressuring her to heal or move on, made her realize something profound. She had been living in the past, clinging to the idea of the life she thought she would have with Max. But now, with Liam by her side, Sophie began to see that there was more to her life than just the heartache and loss. She had a future to build, one step at a time. Later that evening, as they sat together in the warmth of the living room, Sophie felt a stir of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time. It wasn't just the comfort of Liam's presence, it was the feeling of being seen, of being valued for who she was, not for the mistakes or the broken promises of the past. She looked at him, her voice trembling slightly, as she spoke. "I've never felt this way before," she said, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also with something else, something hopeful. "I've always been so scared of being alone. I thought that without Max, I wouldn't be able to do this. I thought I was broken." Liam looked at her with quiet understanding, his gaze steady and kind. "You're not broken, Sophie. You're stronger than you think. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to feel the way you do, but you don't have to go through this alone. Not anymore." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Sophie had never allowed herself to believe. She had spent so much time questioning her worth, doubting whether she could raise her child without Max. But in that moment, she realized that her strength didn't come from anyone else. It came from within her. She had the power to face whatever lay ahead, even if it felt uncertain. Over the next few days, Sophie began to take small steps toward rebuilding her life. Liam continued to be a steady presence, accompanying her to baby stores to pick out the essentials for her little one. She had always imagined doing this with Max, but now she found herself navigating it with Liam, whose quiet support made all the difference. He didn't push her to choose what he thought was best for the baby. Instead, he simply asked questions and listened to her concerns, making sure that each decision felt like her own. One evening, as they sat in the cozy kitchen, eating a simple dinner together, Sophie realized something important. She no longer felt like a failure. She had spent so much time believing that she couldn't do this alone, but with Liam's encouragement, she began to trust herself again. She didn't need to rely on anyone else's validation to know that she was enough. The love she had for her baby was all the validation she needed. "You're doing great, Sophie," Liam said as he passed her a glass of water. "You're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for." Sophie smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I think I'm starting to believe that," she said quietly. For the first time in a long while, Sophie began to feel like she could trust herself. The fear that had held her back from embracing her future started to loosen its grip. She wasn't defined by Max's abandonment. She wasn't defined by the loss she had endured. She was Sophie, and she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Sophie found herself growing more comfortable in her new life. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would still be moments of doubt, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Liam's presence, steady and unwavering, had become a source of strength she never expected to find. She had begun to believe in herself again, And that was the first step toward creating a future she could be proud of, one where she wasn't waiting for someone else to save her. She was saving herself, one small step at a time. The days that followed Sophie's quiet moments of realization were filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The gentle comfort of Liam's presence had begun to weave a new fabric of strength and understanding within her, but there were still moments when the weight of the past felt unbearable. Yet, with every new step forward, Sophie found herself moving closer to a life she had never imagined, one where she didn't have to carry the burden of grief and fear alone. It was on a crisp winter morning, as the snowflakes danced in the air outside Liam's grand home, that Sophie felt the first true sense of peace in months. She had woken up earlier than usual, a quiet calm settling over her. The soft light from the rising sun filtered through the windows, casting warm shadows across the room. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the sharp pang of loneliness that had clung to her since Max's abandonment. She was no longer just a woman left behind. She was a woman with purpose, with strength, and with a future to build. Liam, as always, had been there for her every step of the way. His unwavering support had become a quiet source of comfort that she never thought she would find again. He had shown her that it wasn't about fixing her pain or making everything better. It was about standing beside her, offering his hand when she needed it, and giving her the space to heal on her own terms. As Sophie sat in the cozy living room, her hands resting gently on her growing belly, she reflected on how far she had come. A few months ago, she had been certain that her world had fallen apart beyond repair. She had been alone, abandoned by the man she had loved, left to face a future she never expected. But now, here she was, carrying the life of a child who represented new beginnings. A child who had the potential to change everything for her. Liam walked into the room, his face warm with a gentle smile that had become a comforting sight for Sophie. He didn't say anything at first, but the way his eyes softened as they met hers told her everything she needed to know. He had been her rock, her steady companion through all the ups and downs. And even now, as they sat in the quiet of the room, Sophie felt a deep sense of gratitude for his presence in her life. "How are you feeling today?" Liam asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Sophie smiled softly, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "Better," she said, her voice steady, though her emotions were still raw. "I've been thinking about things, about the future. And I think I'm finally ready to let go of some of the fear. I can do this." Liam nodded, his gaze never wavering. "I know you can," he said quietly. "You've come so far, Sophie. You're stronger than you realize." The words resonated deeply with Sophie. She had spent so long doubting herself, thinking she couldn't make it on her own. But with Liam's encouragement and the love she had for her child, Sophie realized that she had the strength to face whatever came next. She no longer needed to wait for someone to save her. She was capable of saving herself, of creating a life she could be proud of. It was a week later, when the snowstorm had finally passed and the world outside was bathed in the soft glow of winter's afterglow, that a new chapter of Sophie's life truly began. She was sitting in the kitchen, sipping a warm cup of tea, when Liam walked in with his son, Ben, trailing behind him, a wide grin on his face. "Guess what?" Liam said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Ben's been asking to meet you, and I think it's time. Are you ready?" Sophie looked up, surprised by the sudden mention of Liam's son. She had heard a little about Ben, but she hadn't yet met him. The idea of meeting him both excited and terrified her. She had never imagined herself in this kind of family dynamic, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like a natural next step. Liam's smile softened as he placed a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. "This is Ben," he said. "My son. He's been wanting to meet you, Sophie, and I think it's time we all get to know each other better." Sophie's heart fluttered in her chest as Ben stepped forward, his small hands clasped behind his back. He was a picture of innocence, his bright eyes full of curiosity and excitement. "Hi, I'm Ben," he said with an enthusiastic grin. I like dinosaurs and robots. Do you like robots too? Sophie couldn't help but laugh, the warmth of his energy filling the room. She had been so consumed with her own struggles that she hadn't considered how her new life would intersect with Liam's. But seeing Ben, with his boundless enthusiasm and innocence, made her realize that life wasn't just about what she had lost. It was about what she could still gain. I love robots, Sophie replied with a smile, her heart lightening at the sight of the young boy's infectious excitement. She had always wanted to be a mother, and in this moment, she realized that her future was still open, still full of possibility. As the days passed, Sophie began to spend more time with Ben. She watched as he played with his toys, his imagination running wild as he created stories about dinosaurs and superheroes. There was something so pure and refreshing about the way he viewed the world. It reminded her that even in the face of adversity, there was still joy to be found. She also began to see the quiet bond that existed between Liam and Ben, two people who had weathered their own storms and come out stronger for it. In time, Sophie started to feel like she belonged in this new family dynamic. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what she had imagined her life would be, but it was real. It was filled with love, understanding, and support. Liam continued to be her steady anchor, never asking for anything in return, but offering his quiet, unwavering presence. And Ben, with his laughter and innocent joy, became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was light. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the three of them sharing a simple meal, Sophie felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She was no longer the broken woman she had once been. She was a mother, and she was part of something bigger than herself. She had a new family, one that didn't need to be perfect, but one that was built on understanding, patience, and love. As Sophie looked around the table, she realized that sometimes life didn't go according to plan. But that didn't mean it was the end. It was just the beginning of something new, something unexpected. And for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt at peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Liam, Ben, and the child growing inside her. And together, they would create a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.